Good morning, or evening, or night. Huzzah! I have had it in my head for a while now that I want to make a late 16th, early 17th century pair of skirted bodies. Skirted pair of bodies. Pair of bodies that is skirted. Anyway, a pair of bodies is the historical forerunner to the corset, so basically I want to make a corseted dress. There is quite a bit of wardrobe inventory evidence to suggest that a pair of bodies during this time could potentially have a skirt attached to it or a pair of sleeves, etc. But you know what? I want to make a modern version, so we don't even need to get in the weeds on this one. Let's just make the thing. There's plenty of time to complicate this idea in future videos, but for now, I'm just going to smush together my Farthingale and Dorothea bodies patterns. I shortened this to below the knee length, otherwise the smushing was pretty straightforward. And hey, the pattern as I made it is available on my website. Fancy that. Despite having made both the inspiration items, I've been fooled before, so I made a quick mock-up out of cream cotton sateen. Because I was working with a remnant, I included a center front and center back seam in the sateen that wouldn't be there in the final fabric. The pattern is net, so I added seam allowance directly onto the fabric at the side seams of the skirt, hem, and the piecing joints at the strap. The rest doesn't need seam allowance, since it will be bound to finish the edges. The shoulder straps were pieced as the original bodies. This does make fabric cutting much more efficient. I left the sides open about 4 inches down from the waist, which was the true waist point, to make sure I could get in and out of the dress. I should have done this before I sewed the side seams, but I marked out the boning placement just to see it on the body. This is the same boning layout from the Dorothea bodies. It fit like something I'd made twice before, so well in fact it seems I forgot to film the try-on process. Whoops. Since no pattern changes were necessary, I used the mock-up as my lining for the final, which meant I needed to undo the side seam and touch up the boning markings. My final fabric was a lovely vintage bedsheet with a cream background and yellow flowers, and it reminds me of all the yellow local flowers that kind of explode from the trees this time of year. But I also liked that most people my age or older would recognize this ubiquitous print. Seriously, I think everyone had these sheets at some point. I sewed one of the 2 skirt side seams up to the open point. I hadn't marked out the back boning previously, so I did that with a friction pen. Seriously, what did they do before friction? Marked it in ink and didn't give a fluff, obviously. I laid the self against the lining, wrong sides together, and matched up and pinned all the corners and straps and so forth. And here I began the several months long boning stitching process. It doesn't take that long, really. There aren't so many boning channels on this pattern. But I decided halfway through I really wanted to make a pair of Elizabeth I effigy bodies, and the rest is history. Or 2 videos. Go check them out. Anyway, to avoid ugly back stitches on the boning channels, I pulled the beginning and end thread tails from the right side to the wrong side by tugging on the inner thread tail and tied them off. By this point, I had completed the Farthingale video and was super into corded hems, so I decided to add some channels to the hem as well, almost identically to the Farthingale. I realized as I got close to the bottom of the hem that I should probably finish the hem before sewing in the channels, so I paused and finished the hem almost identically to how I finished the Farthingales. Really, the bottom is just the Farthingale I made. I thought about truly boning this thing. Cording is less rigid, less formal, obviously, but it's also kind of insulation, so it can get a little toasty. But in the end, I decided boning would just be too rigid. Like, it would look like I was wearing a breastplate or something, so I went with the cording. I pulled one long cord back and forth through the boning channels. Be careful if you do this because cording can potentially shrink just a little, so you want to leave some slack. I pulled cording through the hem channels. I thought I was going to cord the whole hem, but I ended up liking the way it looked with just the top and bottom 2 channels corded. There's definitely a cleaner way to connect the remaining side seam once the cords are in, but I said fluff it and sewed it together with a French seam. Sure, the cords got a little bulky, but I trimmed all the cording out of the seam that I could, so it wasn't so bad. I sewed a bias binding, made from the lining sateen, around the remaining raw perimeter of the top of the dress. I folded the binding to the wrong side over the raw edge and felled it in place. The original bodies laced up the back, but I decided to lace these up the sides, which means twice the eyelets, but that's okay. I did these in a spiral lacing pattern, meaning the top and bottom eyelets of one side are half the distance apart as all the others. I also decided to lace the strap to the front of the dress similarly to the Elizabeth I effigy bodies, so 8 more eyelets. Sometimes it's nice just to make something pretty. I often get a little wrapped up in the historicism of a thing, or trying to make it artistic, but it's funny how it's usually the simplest, most straightforward garments that get worn more often. If I'm being honest, all the lacing and tying does make it look a bit folksy, but I think the styling can make it more modern. Similarly, I hope the irony of the kitschy bedsheet comes through, but if not, it's just a pretty dress, and that's fine too. If you liked this video, I always appreciate a thumbs up, and hit subscribe if you like moments of soft historicism. I've got a couple fun videos in the can, as they say, one of which is a true classic. Bye!